Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon to the BNC Club. Good afternoon to Reine Okuliar, who is going to do a masterclass today on Jackson Pollock. And Reine, I've introduced you many times already in the past. So you're an art historian, you're from the Courtauld Institute, you have curated over 40 exhibitions worldwide, and you had a gallery in New York, and now you're still a student.
Yes.
And then I'm going to leave it to you because now you're doing a master's, but I don't think it's with the Courtauld. I think it's with another.
No, I'm now doing a PhD with the University of Edinburgh.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So we are all ears for Jackson Pollock.
So Jackson Pollock. So let me share my screen. Oh, could you let me give me the option to share? So yeah, no, so we discussed with Anne-Pierre the idea of a series of a masterclass, and then we said we could focus on post-war American art. And as for those of you who came to the first masterclass, it was about Kader Hatia, so absolutely nothing to do with post-war American art. It was just me indulging. But to talk about American art now, it feels necessary, if you want to talk about post-war America, to start with Jackson Pollock. And so let me share my desktop. Does that work? Sorry. Oops, there we go. Is it working? Or?
It's good. You just need to put it full screen.
It's kind of odd. Sorry about that. It keeps doing the presenter view.
Tu peux, can you? Yeah, if you go to this green button, maybe it will be larger. Yeah, and then. Normalement, avec le clavier, avec les petites flèches, tu dois pouvoir passer de l'un à l'autre.
Mais vous voyez la page en entier?
On la voit un peu coupée, mais là, c'est pas mal. C'est quand même pas mal. Tu peux le faire là-dessus, si tu veux.
Ok, bon. Alors, c'est parti. So, okay. Yeah, so why should we start by Jackson Pollock? So this can be explained by a few dates in his biography, which the most important one is this drip paintings, which it's a short period from 1947 to 1951. So we're truly within the post-war period. But let's go back further a little bit. So he was born on January 28, 1912 in Cody, Wyoming. He comes from a very poor family. His father was an itinerary farmer, and they traveled to Arizona and California in his youth. And by 1928, the family moved to Los Angeles, and he joined the Manual Arts High School, where he met his lifelong friend, the sculptor Reuben Kadish. So Jackson later mentioned Native American art in interviews, and he said that he encountered it in the west of the United States. And interestingly, in an interview, Kadish explains that the teaching at the high school was so mediocre that they both rather went to the museum, where the art back then was also so mediocre that they would always go upstairs to the ethnographic section of the museum. And that's when they decided to go on a trip where they met a Native American to see how they were painting. And so the traditional painting is a sand painting, where you pour pure pigments directly onto the floor. So they prepare and flatten the sand and then do those drawings that are figurative and that are meant for health rituals, but still we can start seeing the ideas forming. Then in 1930, Jackson Pollock moved to New York, where he joined the Art Student League. So there he was taught by Thomas Hart Benton, who's a regionalist painter. So I've put the picture on the left. So I don't know, you're seeing it properly, right? Is by Benton. Pollock described him as someone who is strong enough that you could strongly reject his teachings. So, however, it is important to note at this point that the regionalists wanted to create a new all-American art that was not owing anything to Europe, and in particular not to France, which at the time was the center of the arts world, where that's where everybody was looking, and he wanted to create a new language. So Pollock, whose painting is to the right, painted in that vein until about 1938. So I put a list of painters to the side, which is all the people that actually went to the Art Student League in New York, which saw Twombly, Rothko, Calder, Frankenthaler. So a lot of them went through that school. So back to the general context, not to forget that in 1930, we are in the midst of the Great Depression. And Pollock is from a poor family. And we know through interview with Lee Krasner that he lived in dire poverty, trying to his best at the time to find 5 cents meal in New York. So here I've put a picture to the left. This is the East Village. So this is where you would go to Soho House now, and this is during the Great Depression. So in 1935, he joined the WPA Federal Art Project, which as an easel painter, which is something quite hard to imagine, but understandable as it gave him some financial stability. Another important milestone is in 1936, is an encounter with David Alfaro Siqueiros, who's one of the most important Mexican muralists, with Diego Rivera and Jose Clemente Orozco. So Pollock participated in his New York workshop in 1936. So when I first read participated into his workshop, and just after being an easel painter, I had something very traditional in mind. And then I read a little bit more, and it was actually a political art workshop in preparation of the 1936 General Strike for Peace and May Day Parade. So Siqueiros was a communist to the extent that Trotsky didn't quite cut it for him, and he was part of the assassination attempt against Trotsky in Mexico City in 1940. Anyway, Pollock is said to have been taught by him the dripping, the pouring technique. And so here we at least see that there is a change in his color scheme and a certain fluidity in his work. And I've read that, but couldn't find anything to back the argument that Siqueiros showed him how to, the dripping technique. But one thing that is absolutely sure, and that is of absolute great importance to all actually the American painters at the time, for them, Mexican muralists taught them skill and a departure actually from easel painting. And that is absolutely fundamental for all the abstract painters of the post-war era. So this takes us to 1937. So I'm keep going about the context. So this is not necessarily key in Pollock's personal biography, but it's nonetheless an event that is fundamental. Munich, 1937, so we're in Germany, and from July 19 to November 30, there is the Degenerate Art Exhibition. Some artists, like Marcel Duchamp, were already going back and forth between New York and Europe since, I think for Duchamp, 1915. And some, like George Grosz, had left Europe as soon as Hitler rose to power in 1933. But the status of degenerate artist, coupled with the start of the war in 1939, accelerates everything. And New York sees European artists arriving in droves to its shore. So I took some example, and I'm pretty sure I might have forgotten some, but are you seeing a blank page? Or?
We're seeing a page with a white page with 1939 on it.
Okay. So I don't know why my thing has decided not to work, but there we go. Oh, there we go. Sorry.
That's good.
So arriving in 1939, we have Roberto Matar, Fernand Léger. We also have someone like André Masson. André Masson, I put a later painting which has the same title of an earlier painting by Pollock, just to show that the exchange was not necessarily one-sided, but that there were exchanges and that those were quite important. So if we continue as to who is arriving, in 1940, we have Piet Mondrian, Jack Lipchitz, 1941, Marc Chagall. Still in 1941, André Breton, Max Ernst, and the list goes on. So if we look beyond visual art, even we could think that the whole Bauhaus arrived in the United States, New York, Chicago. So in a sense, what I'm trying to say is modern art has migrated to the United States, to New York at that time. And if they were exchanging before, those are now preponderant, like prominent. And someone like Pollock said that the most important artist actually didn't come, Picasso and Matisse. But the degree of possibilities in terms of, let's say, exchange, but also confrontation, competition, emulation has completely changed. And if nothing else, the arrival of those massive figures of modern art has made something very clear, is that the American abstract painter are nowhere on the modern art map. So in 1942, an artist called John Graham curated at the Macmillan Gallery an exhibition called French and American Painters. So on the French side, he showed Picasso, Braque, Matisse, and on the other side, completely unknown American abstract artists, Willem de Kooning, Lee Krasner, Achille Gorky, and for his first New York exhibition, Jackson Pollock. And that's the painting that he showed. So this is actually also how he met Lee Krasner, who was to become absolutely key in his life and in his career. So, because at this point, I have not mentioned key part of Pollock life, but also personality. It's depression and alcoholism. So the reason he was not at war is because he was deemed unfit for service. He had spent a good part of 1938 in a psychiatric unit. So Lee took care of him on a personal level, but also she took care of his career. She was the one who was part of the art scene. She managed his contacts, she managed his contracts. But she also introduced him to modern art theory in a more profound way, because if you look, the painting in the middle by Hans Hofmann, she was taught by Hans Hofmann, who's a German-born painter who established as early as 1915 an art school in Munich where he would teach the art of Cézanne, the Cubist, and Kandinsky, so extremely avant-garde. And if you put it side to side with Benton, who taught Pollock, you understand the importance of the encounter with Lee Krasner. So this encounter with Krasner opens the doors to other relationships in New York, because as I said, like, she was part of the scene. And one of those people that he encountered was Peggy Guggenheim. because one place that became quite central indeed in New York was Peggy Guggenheim's gallery, which was called The Art of This Century, that she opened in 1942. So beyond, so at the gallery, it was a place where people would meet and discuss and see art. But beyond the art of the exiled artists, there was also displayed Guggenheim's collection that spanned from 1910 to 1942. And you had Cubism, Futurism, Orphism, European abstraction, the Suprematist, Dada, Surrealism. So all of this now available for American artists to see. You had Constantin Brancusi, Jan Harp, Giacometti, Henry Moore, etc., etc. But what it also brought was an acute awareness that there was not in the collection or exhibited on the wall, as there was not a single American painter. So she gave, on November 9, 1943, she gave Pollock his first solo exhibition. So I've picked this painting because it was part of the show. It's called The She-Wolf. And it is quite representative of what is widely considered as Pollock's first period, which is a sort of surrealist abstraction. So you still have a sense of the figure. There could be a connection to mythology because it's called the She-Wolf. Is it the one that fed Romulus and Remus? The figure is abstractive, but there is still a boring to Cubism, like you feel like you're seeing like one part of like one side of the She-Wolf, and a bit of automatic writing with this sense of unconscious struggle. The reason I picked it as well is for the anecdote. This painting is not part of the collection of the MoMA, which first reserved the painting for $650. Then they got cold feet because they thought it was a bit too expensive for this young painter. And they decided to go for it when the art critic Sweeney used the image of this painting for a review of the show in Harper's Bazaar. So yes, I looked, inflation adjusted, it means that they were hesitating to get that Pollock for $9,830. So that's for how much they acquired it at the time. So in 1943, Peggy Guggenheim gave him his first show, signed him a contract that would give him financial stability. So that's them together. But she also commissioned a mural from him for her townhouse on Lexington Avenue. So here we see them in front of the mural. So Marcel Duchamp, a man of many good ideas, suggested that the work should be on canvas. Fantastic idea, because the work was then part of an exhibition at MoMA as early as 1947, so a few years later, called Large Scale Modern Paintings. So another important thing happened in relation to that mural, and it was seen and liked and loved by the art critic Clement Greenberg. Clement Greenberg did not think much of the exhibition. He thought that Pollock had pretentious titles, that he was modeling all different styles. So we can understand what he means when we look at that, and we can see that there's like kind of borings from Miro, Picasso, but then he said when he saw the mural, I took one look at it and I thought, now that's great art. And I knew Jackson was the greatest painter this country had produced. So why is it so important? So in an interview, Elaine de Kooning described Clement Greenberg in this term. Clem was the granddaddy of hype. So what Clem said at the time was what mattered, and he became a champion of Pollock. So now, why did he become a champion of Pollock? Is that for Greenberg, painting had lost its way over centuries by subjecting itself to literature. So painting had become illustrative, whereas what should really matter is painting for its own sake. A flat surface with abstract shapes that assume being just that. And that's what the mural is. It repeats itself. So some people talked about it as a wallpaper. It encompasses the whole surface without worrying about a beginning or an end. And so this painting is a transitional moment, a transitional work that brings us to the second period of Pollock, which is his most well-known, the drip paintings. So I will quickly note, so this period for Pollock is actually very short, 1947, 1951. He was not suffering, he was actually at the time suffering from neither depression nor alcoholism. And then he got depressed again and got back into drinking. And he started a third period where everything is black and white. He's going back to figuration. And this third period is generally considered very much as a fallout. So back to the drip paintings. On a very materialistic level, they were made possible by Pollock and Krasner moved to Spring, East Hampton on Long Island. They bought a house with an adjacent barn thanks to a loan by Peggy Guggenheim. And at that point, they're still incredibly poor because Pollock doesn't sell anything. There is no light, there is no heating in the house or in the barn. They don't have a car. Everything is done with their bikes. But on the bright side, he can start working on the floor on a scale that was not conceivable before. So what are the drip paintings? They are completely abstract paintings. Here we are looking at one of the largest in scale. Pollock uses liquid paint, so mostly house paint and also enamel, which give a bit of a shine to some of the painting. Most of them are horizontal, which it was claimed it was a connection with his childhood and the horizontality of the landscape in West America, West US. Pollock would use sticks and knives, for instance, to let the painting drip. And to get some impasto, some texture, he would use sand, broken glass, and other found material. So Pollock noted, however, that he was not the first one to paint on the floor. So to take his words, the Orientals did it. So he considered that the technique was dictated by the time we live in. So the technique was a mean to an end. And what was the end that he had in mind? So if we take a bit of a step back, Pollock is considered as a protagonist of a larger movement called the abstract expressionism. So the end is expression. So the artist expresses his time, the advent of the radio, the atomic bomb, the speed, the fear, the excitement. And so artists have always expressed what is going on in their own times. But the difference is that at that point, we're in a mechanical age. We have cameras to illustrate. So the modern artist can use another source and he can start looking within. So the technique is the consequence of this, this willingness to look within. So Pollock also said that he preferred painting on the floor because he could paint from all sides of the painting. He could feel part of it, he was nearer to it, and he felt, he said many times in interviews, in the painting. And the scale of the painting also allows the viewer to feel like you're in the painting. So having said that, they seem incredibly simple and simple to make. And so quickly there was like a criticism in a sense that anyone could do, and I quote like terms like anyone could do baked macaroni, and that it was just some like random outpour of someone unconscious. So in this respect, I think that at this point, we have seen that Pollock is a trained painter. He's versed in cubism, in surrealism, automatic writing, Mexican muralist, etc. So he doesn't share anyone's unconscious. And the reality is that his pouring is incredibly controlled, and there is a balance of colors that is nothing random about it, as you can see in that detail of the painting Cathedral. But to some extent, let's go with the argument, there is an element of truth. So if we were trying to do the same over years, potentially we could manage to achieve a drip painting. But the result will necessarily be a sub-Pollock. And so why is he so important if you can't basically, if he can't like directly influence the next painter? And I think it's because there are many strands in the drip paintings. And so after having said all of that, it's now that I'm going to start unpacking the drip paintings. So the first thing about them is that they make the process apparent. So that's one thing that we immediately start thinking about the process. It's an optical style, it's a personal gesture, but it's also a painting that has sand, that has broken glass that you can see as long as you approach them. So they're an ode to materiality. So this is the strand, the materiality, that has been retained by the minimalist. They considered Pollock paintings not to be pure painting, but to be an impersonal poetry of material. Very often as well, like, so if you look at the second strand, so to speak. So Pollock's, here we go. Pollock's studio practice has been incredibly well documented by Hans Namuth, and it's often been compared to his practice to a ritual dance. So there is something very physical about him going about these large canvases that sort of melt onto the floor. And the critic, Harold Rosenberg, said about it, at a certain moment, the canvas, at a certain moment, the canvas began to appear to one American painter after another as an arena in which to act. What was to go on canvas was not a picture, but an event. So he coined the term action painting. So Namuth's photographs that I've just shown were discussed at the time as much as the paintings. And if you have those documents at the time, the term action painting, and it immediately captured the imagination of young artists in New York and around the world. So this strand inspired someone like Alan Caprow. So in 1958, Alan Caprow wrote an essay in Art News where he called the act of painting, and Pollock appears as an inspiration for his happenings. We could go as far as pointing to someone like Mercy Cunningham, and who, with his partner John Cage, developed a radical new concept where dance and music could exist independently, and there was no center to the choreography, making them all over dance, as the same way Pollock was doing all over paintings. So then in another connection that came to mind was the Gutai Group. So in 1954, the Gutai Group was founded in Japan, and they wrote their manifesto in 1956. They mentioned Pollock. They visited him in New York, saw his work, saw the pictures by Namuth that were widely circulated. And in the manifesto, they want to go beyond abstraction, but say that the artwork needs to be the result of the act. And so here is a painting of Kazuo Shiraga, who's painting with his feet. So as far as action is concerned, we can also point to France with someone like Niki de Saint-Phal, who would like shoot at her painting, or Yves Klein, who had women like dip in the blue paint and made the anthropomorphy. Like I almost forgot that. So now onto the third strand. Like so, we had the material, the dance, and the third strand would be the scale. So with the scale comes a notion, which is the notion of the sublime, which is quite important when we think about abstract expressionism. And it was Barnett Newman who wrote an essay called "The Sublime is Now." So for once, it's actually a short essay, and it's easily available online. So, but what he says in that essay, he's telling us that the Greek were concerned with making Christ the man. The Middle Ages were concerned with cathedral. And Michelangelo made a cathedral out of a man. And in this sense, Michelangelo achieved the sublime. Thereafter, painting has been concerned with beauty rather than sublimity. So to him, even Picasso questions the nature of beauty. Mondrian, who's concerned with the perfection of his geometry, doesn't allow exaltation from the viewer. So the sublime, he goes on saying, can only happen with American artists. Why? Because they are unburdened by the European cultural heritage. They're not concerned with beauty. So, and because it is a world without myth, without legends, the sublime can come for pure elation. So there is an exaltation between the viewer and the painting, because like music, the viewer is in the painting. And so remember that Pollock was like, found it really important that he would be in the painting. And so he wants to take us in the painting, and that's achievable through scale. So these new cathedrals are made out of the artist feeling and are echoed through the feelings of the viewers. So the reason I wanted to finish on the notion of the sublime is because all of a sudden there is a very political tone to it. And in 1949, there is a 5-page spread on Jackson Pollock in Life magazine that makes him a household name. The subtitle to the article is the greatest living painter in the United States. So as a reminder, a few years before, Graham curated French and American artists because there was a complete lack of interest in American art. Greenberg appears as a champion of these new voices as the war ends, but most importantly, the United States has become a superpower. Pollock finds a new language. It's a whole American language. He's never traveled to Europe. It's the language of the sublime that, according to Newman, was only even possible in America. So with Pollock, what we also have is a new symbol. Conveniently, he's from the West and the chain smoking. So like they accoladed the image of the cowboy. And the fact that, and also what is very important about his painting is that there is this sense of freedom that comes from his gesture and from the documentation of this dance. And so this freedom, of course, is opposed to dictatorship, to communism. So he is an artistic and political icon. And a retrospective was planned at the moment that became a memorial exhibition because he tragically died in a car accident because he was inebriated. But this exhibition that was planned to be a retrospective for a living artist and toured the world. So in 1958, like it came to the Whitechapel Gallery in London, where it was the first time it was exhibited in the UK. So with Pollock, we see that the center of modern art has shifted from Europe to the United States, from Paris to New York. And so that beyond the dates, it would be impossible to talk about American post-war without considering Pollock in depth because of the political attachment. So that's me for Pollock, and I hope that it gave you a good sense of who he was and what he meant in terms of his contribution to the 20th century.
Thank you so much, Reine. Thank you so much, Reine. If you can hear me, maybe you can.
I can. Sorry.
Yes. Okay. This is fabulous. I have a question. The abstract expressionism circle included only one woman, and that woman was Lee Krasner.
Yes.
There were no other women, no?
No.
No. And she was do you believe that she was there because she was the wife of Jackson Pollock, or because she had her own talent?
No, she was already in the exhibition in 1942 by John Graham. And she was the one who was a friend with de Kooning, she was the one who knew everybody. She was part of the abstract painter circle in New York. And then, but she decided to, and so in 1942, she sees Pollock's work in Graham's exhibition. And it's the only artist that she doesn't know, that she hasn't met. So she literally went and knocked at his door and showed up at his studio to see, and she introduced herself, and that's how they met. But she was a known quantity in those circle where he wasn't. But she decided to dedicate herself to his work, and being together meant dedication because he was deeply alcoholic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have a question from Alexandra. Alexandra, if you want to talk, I don't know if you're muted.
Yes, I'm unmuted. Yes, I would like you to expand a little, about the concept of sublime from Kant, which is the relationship of nature, the gigantic of nature and the size of the human. How does it come to Jackson Pollock, this type of definition of the sublime?
Well, Kant, and I might be completely wrong, but when he talks about the sublime, there's a connection to beauty. It's part of an aesthetic, whereas
no, there is a connection to stress of nature.
Sorry, I couldn't hear.
Georges Didier Berman a beaucoup écrit. Well, okay, sorry. No, it's about threats. I mean, the threat of the nature, which is, it's above beauty. When he talks about sublime, it's about the threat of the gigantic, of the nature that can kill man or whatever. So it's not the beauty concept in Kant.
So what's the question then?
No, the question was that another theory was about, since you did not mention, and I read a lot about the Didier Berman philosopher on contemporary art and sublime, I just wanted to have your reflection, if you had any, on the nature part or not of Pollock sublime paintings.
So the question is, was Jackson Pollock
any element?
Did you read Kant? Is that what you're?
Did you read Kant, or what about the immensity of the U.S. nature? And since that was like the classic way of talking about sublime, which was the Kant one, that we can see in some German painters. Well, yes. Is there any part of nature thinking in his painting in relation to human and nature and sublime?
My understanding of the way the abstract expression is like see the sublime, and the reason why it echoed with Clement Greenberg is because they put behind the question of nature as well as the questions of beauty, and the painting becomes like this flat surface. It becomes like the painting is enough in itself. You don't have to represent nature. You don't have to have a connection with nature actually. So Lee Krasner, I told you, was taught by Hans Hofmann, And Hans Hofmann met Jackson Pollock, and Hans Hofmann told him, but you're going to repeat yourself because you're not producing from nature. And Jackson Pollock replied, and apparently Lee Krasner was mortified at the time, but like he replied to Hofmann, "I am nature." So his relationship to nature is like it all comes from within. I hope it answers even partly.
And Reine, and that's we can rebound on an aspect I wanted to discuss with you about, is that he was from Wyoming, so it's a region that was he was traditionally near to Indian lands, and that the Indians used to sand to make. As you saw on the first slide, on the slide number 3, yes, the Indians were doing that on the surface of on the ground with the sand and drawings, and it was sort of a tribal thing as well.
Yeah. So what I understood, like from these little videos and stuff, is. So it's like pure pigments that are poured, and it's generally those circles that are made, and then a person that needs to be healed will be sat in the middle of the circle. So it's very much part of a ritual and like a holistic health ritual. So it's not meant to be a painting per se, but he went and witnessed those people, and it's pouring those pigments straight on the floor.
So we have a question here. I'm going to, yeah.
Hello. Yeah, I was, you were talking about the fact that the American art, nobody was really very much interested about it. And I remember that in '64, I think Rauschenberg win the Biennale de Venise for United States, and that was a crucial moment in the reconnection of American art. And I was going to ask you, was he close to Rauschenberg, and do you think Pollock had already a true recognition in Europe before 1964, or do you think that the impact of this prize for America was very important in his career?
Well, so he dies in '56. And then he's already showed in Europe in 58 when it tours. But what I think is interesting, so yeah, so '64 is like, it's like the reckoning that it's not Paris anymore. It's definitely everything is in New York when Rauschenberg wins. But if you look just at New York before '64, like before the rest of the world sort of sees what's happening there, I think like you wouldn't have Rauschenberg without Pollock, if it makes sense, like just because because of the materiality, because it exploded in so many directions that it allowed for this to happen. And so Mercy Cunningham, for instance, who does those all over dance, like he starts in the 40s, 50s, and he's very close to Rauschenberg and Jasper Jones. And they all mention Pollock as part of their sort of source, kind of.
Well, all right, that was fantastic. Thank you so much, Reine, for such a enlightenment of this period of abstract expressionism in the US, and the beginning of performance in art. And that's what we wanted to the club members to have links and keys to what we're seeing today. And we're not going to say which is the next webinar because it's still a surprise. And we wish you all a very good evening in London and wherever you are in the world.